It's the October show. Hopefully you can hear me. Let me. It's about. I'm about 30 seconds ahead of what you're seeing right now. So, give me a second to check the audio levels. You should be able to hear me. If you can't, let me know. You can type into chat anything you want. We're going to take questions. We're going to take comments. We're going to take all sorts of stuff. And I can hear myself. That means my audio is working. Always a good thing. So this month is going to be a little bit different because I'd like to welcome my co-host, who is Rebecca. They can see you now, Rebecca. You say hi.
How you doing?
I've known Rebecca for I don't know how many. I'm not even going to say how many years I've known her. It's been a long time. And she has been a regular watcher of Ogma's Oratory. Volume is low, but not bad. Okay. Hopefully it's, yeah, let me see here. Yeah, I think we're probably going to be okay. We're trying some new things tonight. Hopefully it will work out real well. Rebecca and I did some testing last week. Is it last week?
Yep.
Yeah. We did a test cast for over an hour and a half. Everything worked out fine, so hopefully tonight it will work fine and we won't have any problems. Fingers crossed. So tonight's show, we're calling it Samhain Shenanigans because, well, I thought that was an interesting title. It's all about Samhain. It's about, Samhain and the harvest festivals, the various harvest festivals that cultures have across the world, anything that we can find that might be of interest, because Samhain is not necessarily the only. The Celts were not the only culture to celebrate this time of the year. We did a little bit of cat, fingers crossed. We did a little bit of research to add to what we already knew and come up with some interesting stuff. Hopefully interesting stuff. So I guess the first thing we want to talk about is, what is Samhain? You want to take that or you want me to take that?
Samhain is thought to have originated with the ancient Celtic festivals, where people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off roaming ghosts. They would also tell people's fortunes during this time. It's a time where the veil between the worlds is the thinnest. It allows us to communicate with those that we love that are dearly departed, or it allows things to come through that are not so great, and that's the reason why offerings were left out to keep them away from the home.
Okay, so you touched on a couple of things there. The veil being thinnest. And really what that means, all that means, is that the boundary between this world and the next becomes thin. It becomes thin enough that we can actually see and experience what's on the other side. And those beings that are on the other side can actually sometimes penetrate and come through to this side. And what I'm going to do real quick in chat, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, that's the wrong one. I'm going to add the link here so that people, if they want to, and they have a microphone connected to their device, they can chime in and actually speak to us. There's the link right there. For those who are interested, and we can have a conversation live and on the air. But the veil in various cultures will talk about it in various ways. A lot of people look at the veil between this world and the next world as thinning just at this time of year. But it can also be thin at the other side of the wheel. If you think of the year as a wheel, we're at Samhain, and at the other side is Beltane.
Yep, Beltane is the other one where it's really thin.
Right, and so what we get is a thinning of the veil between at both points of the year, and therefore it becomes thickest let me think about this, at, well, I guess it would be thickest at what, Imbolc? And, is that right? No, that can't be right.
Oh, you're asking me to name the holidays in order.
Not necessarily in order, but I'm trying to think of where the other quarter points are, and I think it's like Imbolc and Lunasan. I think are the places where if it's thinnest at Beltane and at Samhain, it would be thickest 90 degrees. So we've got. Yeah, I'm trying to do this with looking at myself on the camera. So we've got Samhain down here, we got Beltane up here, 90
That would
degrees.
be Imbolc and the one I can never pronounce.
Lunasan?
Lugh. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually amazed I got those right. Like, what two holidays would Imbolc and Lunasan, that would be when the veil is thickest between this world and the next. So, what happens when the veil thins? Well, at this time of year, most people associate that thinning with ghost sightings, with spirits coming through from the other side. At Beltane, those spirits can come through, but because we're looking at Beltane, we're looking at fertility as opposed to harvest. A lot of times what happens is those spirits may come through. They may actually come through in the form of babies, children. That's one of the reasons why children conceived at Beltane were considered to be children of the gods. They may actually be a reincarnated spirit of someone, possibly someone you knew, someone in your family or a friend who you knew who had passed on, and now have come back in this new form of a child. Did your research indicate any of that?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit. Like I said, I was researching mostly Samhain, so it didn't really go too much into Beltane. But yes, that is some of the stuff that I ran across. It's interesting because there was actually two views on it. The first one was what you mentioned, where the children who were conceived during Beltane were considered sacred children. The second one was those born during Beltane were considered sacred children, because some people have the view that the soul doesn't actually enter the body until birth.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me a child of the gods because my birthday is Beltane. You're just laughing.
Somehow I'm not surprised. Now here's the thing. I'm a Samhain baby.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That explains a whole lot, actually.
That everybody says that.
Well, no, I'm thinking that explains a whole lot. We'll talk about this off camera.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I always assumed that it was just children conceived at Beltane, but that makes sense. If the soul enters at birth, then yeah, we're talking about that.
Yep, that's the two different views that I ran across.
That gives a whole new meaning. That gives a whole new meaning to the concept of I am God.
Yeah, I know, right?
So what else did you find?
Well, I found a pretty extensive timeline that goes through how Samhain became Halloween here in the United States.
Okay.
It starts back in the 5th century BC with the Greeks, who had trade routes that ran up into the Celtic territory in Ireland. And they described the different ceremonies and rites that happened with the Irish Druids that basically were Beltane and Samhain and Imbolc and all of that.
Okay. Sorry, I was... One of the things you'll find is that while you're talking, I'm busy doing other things, so I may or may not be listening to you completely.
That's fine, that's fine.
As I choke in my own spit. One of the problems
Let's
with getting
see.
older. So, all right, so, uh, yeah, I was checking other things, so I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
That's all right.
I hate to admit that.
Um, let's see. In 43 AD, the Roman Empire had conquered a majority of the Celtic territory. And in the course of 400 years that they ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of Roman origin were combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. The first was Veralia, which was a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. And the second was a day to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. And the symbol of Pomona is the apple, and the incorporation of the ceremony into Samhain probably explains the tradition of bobbing for apples.
That's interesting. As you were saying that, that was the first thing that came to my mind was bobbing for apples. Apples are ripe at this point in the year, and I see Marcus has joined us on Discord.
Mm-hmm.
I know he has a whole lot of stuff about the thinning of the veil. Um, it also talks a little bit about the fact that the Romans celebrated this time of year. One of the things that I think a lot of witches don't realize is that it wasn't just Western European cultures, the Celts, as a prime example. It wasn't just the Celts that celebrated this time of year, even though we use the Celtic label, Celtic name of Samhain for this time of year. There are a lot of cultures that celebrate this time of year because it is the last harvest. It is that point in the year where we are pulling in the last of what we will before winter hits. Whatever we get after this harvest, we have to live on. It has to sustain us through the winter. And certainly I know that modern witches, modern pagans, have a hard time with that concept because if we get hungry, we go to the grocery store. That's not going to work so well if you are a subsistence-based culture and you are growing all of the food for you and your family and everybody in your village. Plus, on top of that, you've got to probably feed the people in the town nearby, so they're going to take a percentage of whatever it is you grew because they're busy doing other things. They're not farming. They're either administering or they're merchanting. They're selling things. They're doing all sorts of things, but they're not farming. So you, as a rural farmer, someone outside of town, and preferably many villages around that town, are all growing crops, so that a small portion from all of those villages can then go feed the town through the winter, and you have plenty left over. If it was a good harvest, you have plenty left over to sustain yourself through the winter. That's actually one of the big themes. If you read the original Robin Hood legend, it's not just money. It's not money and taxes that Robin is stealing from the king and from the sheriff. It's grain. It's the crops that they are levying as a tax on the people in the villages. And
well,
so,
a lot of people don't realize that the barter system was so important back then.
exactly.
If you had a wagon wheel maker and you needed a new wagon wheel, you would trade him like a wheel of cheese because you're a cheese maker for a new wagon wheel.
Right. You would trade something of value for something else of value, and that
Yes,
actually,
that's actually the basic etymology of our word salary.
yes,
Salt used to be a highly prized commodity, so they would pay people their wages in salt, hence a salary.
correct. And barter of any type is the basis of our modern monetary system. The paper that we trade each other for whatever it certainly at this point has no actual value. it's the value is the belief that the people using it place on it, that if I give you this piece of paper, you will allow me to take something I value in exchange. And so, we got a little, we got an off topic, but it's all related. This is the last harvest, and so this is the last time that you're going to be able to take anything from the land that you can use to sustain yourself through the long, hard winter. And anybody who's ever gone camping, if you've been out and usually you go camping. Well, I go camping in the summer when it's warm, relatively speaking. But if you've been out camping when a storm has come by, a thunderstorm, you realize just how powerful that is and how scary a thunderstorm is. Now imagine similar circumstances, not much more than what our modern tent would be. That's your house, and now you've got snow falling, and a lot of it, depending on where you're living. That's a scary time of year when you may or may not actually be able to get out of your house to go anywhere, to go to the next house over, let alone down the road 5 miles to the town. You're cut off for the winter. This is what you've harvested has got to last you. And so, want to celebrate this time of year. Pretty much every culture is going to celebrate that last harvest as the one time in the year where they're going to actually be able to tell for a fact, is this going to sustain me? Am I going to be able to live through the winter? Is my family going to make it?
I'm actually going to back up a couple of steps. The word Samhain, the etymology of that is basically end of summer, beginning of winter. It hasn't been properly translated, but that's the loose translation that everybody kind of connects on. And then as far as the thunderstorms during camping, I'm the crazy person who just throws my clothes aside and runs outside because I think that's awesome.
Well, and people think I'm crazy when I tell them that Samhain is the beginning of winter. No, winter doesn't start until Yule. That's why we celebrate Yule. No, that's not correct.
No.
This is the beginning of winter coming up in a couple of weeks. Yule is the middle of winter, just like Litha is midsummer. It's the middle. It's not the start. And that calendar that you're using to determine when that actual season starts, you have to remember it was created by a Catholic Pope for political reasons and nothing else. That was the whole point in him creating that calendar, the Gregorian calendar, which we call it the calendar. Well, it's the Gregorian calendar as opposed to the Julian calendar, which the Romans used, the late Romans used.
Yeah, and I forget which calendar it was, but at one point they just completely got rid of October.
Got rid of it?
Yeah, I remember seeing as a kid a program where they were talking about the calendar and how it got to be the modern Gregorian calendar. And they had said that they had cut out weekends at one point, and they had cut out certain days of certain months at another point, and then they just got rid of October at one point, and it was crazy.
Well,
I wish I had the reference for you, but I was a kid when I saw it.
Right, and I know that the reason that October is not the 8th month, oct being 8 in Latin, and November is not the 9th month, being nova being 9, and December, deca being 10, is not the 10th month, is because Pope Gregory the 13th, I believe, it changed all of that around. They were originally the 8th, 9th, and 10th months of the year when we had 13 months in the Julian calendar, 28 days per month. The problem with the Julian calendar is that if you have 13 months of 28 days, that adds up to a total of 360 days. Well, there's 365 days in the year, in the solar year, and so what happens was that the Romans, at least, decided that what they would do with those extra 5 days at the end of the year is they would celebrate Saturnalia. It was that time between the years, and therefore was very magical because it was It was, but it was not. Kind of like Samhain is. It's an in between. For 5 days, we're in between the years, and that's also why they named the first month January after their Roman god Janus, who was the god of doorways and new beginnings. They went through a doorway for 5 days. They were outside of the year, and then they passed through a doorway at the beginning of the new year, which Janus was in charge of, and therefore January.
Now, it's worth noting while we're talking about dates that while here in the Northern Hemisphere, we experience Samhain in October, it's typically October 31st, November 1st area. But in the Southern Hemisphere, it's April 30th and May 1st. It's that area.
Well, and that brings up another controversy, because, and I don't know if it still is or not. I know that when I was a baby witch, which is smaller than I am now, much less gray in the beard, one of the big controversies was, should people in Australia, because they're in the Southern Hemisphere, should they be celebrating Samhain on October 31st, or should they be celebrating it on April 30th?
My personal opinion, okay, and this is just my personal opinion,
which is pretty much par for any witch.
Yeah. Samhain is a time of summer's end, winter's beginning, and for them, their summer's end, winter's beginning happens in April and May. So I don't see a reason why they can't celebrate it in April and May, since the basis of the whole Sabbath is the end of summer,
the harvest,
the beginning of winter.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. If you're celebrating this, if you're celebrating this religion, if you are following this path, you should be following it because it is a nature-based spiritual path. You should be following the nature of the area you live in if you're going to get the most out of this. So, yeah, I agree with you. My take is that if you are in the Southern Hemisphere, whether it's Australia, Argentina, whatever, South Africa, you should be celebrating at this point in the year. You should be celebrating Beltane. You should be, it's coming out of winter and coming into spring. Actually, it's coming into summer. If this is the beginning of winter here, it's the beginning of summer down in the Southern Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Beltane is the beginning of summer. Litha, being in the middle of, or the end of June, is the middle of summer. This all works out. The other thing is that all of these holidays, all of these 8 holidays that we celebrate as witches, are all interconnected. They are not separate, standalone holidays in and of themselves. They connect with every other holiday.
Yeah, they all follow a timeline and a path.
Correct.
For instance, I believe Samhain is the one where the Lord dies only to be reborn again in Yule.
Right.
So they each follow this specific storyline to show the circle of death and rebirth.
There's that. There is definitely that. But things I was thinking of how they were interconnected. For example, we'll take Beltane, the maypole. After you dance the maypole, it's now a nicely wrapped pole wrapped in ribbons with this wreath
and
around it.
People.
And it celebrates the fertility of the people. Now, at Yule, that becomes your Yule log. That you burn it in the Yule fire. You
right.
Release that fertility for the next year in the Yule fire. So there's that connection there. With Samhain, it's a little more practical. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but with Samhain,
the Samhain bonfires used to relight the hearths as well.
Yes,
they would put out their hearths, and then they would take fire from the sacred bonfire, and relight their hearths with it for blessings and fruitfulness in the home.
Right.
And then you'd burn your Yule log in that fire.
And the thing to remember is that the hearth fire burned from Samhain all the way to Beltane. It was your central heating for the winter. Well, once Beltane got here, typically, depending on where you lived, I mean, if you were in Norway, if you were a Norse, it might still be cold well after Beltane. But in England and Western Europe and certainly Mediterranean areas, it would certainly be more than warm enough to extinguish that hearth fire. So what you do is you create this. You start the communal sacred fire. Everybody in the community, everybody in the village takes part. They light this fire, and then the people take a brand from that sacred fire and use it to relight their own hearth in their own home.
Yes.
Yeah. Personally, I find it much more relatable, understandable. When it's fine to say, well, at this time of the year they would take the sacred fire and they would extinguish their hearths and they would then relight them with the sacred fire. That's fine. That certainly is factual. Personally, when I read that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But when you put it into context and you say, yeah, well, they didn't have a fire all through summer because they didn't need one. So now they got to relight all those fires in their homes, and this is how they did it. Now it suddenly takes on a much more spiritual, much more sacred context of, okay, so this isn't a matter of this really is something of import because they didn't have this fire burning in the summer. They need it to burn all the way through the winter, because remember, they're not going to extinguish these fires in their hearth during the day. They're going to bank it at night, but they're going to burn wood in it all day long. It's going to heat the houses. It's going to be the gathering place for the family at night. It's going to be the main source of light, because remember, candles are dangerous. And if you had candles, you were probably well off. Most people.
Yeah, candles were very expensive.
Right. Most people, unless they lived in a town or a city, they didn't have candles. Candle makers tended to be one of those businesses in the town where they were busy making candles for the winter and didn't have time to farm. So it can be really difficult for the modern witch to really understand and fully grasp how things were back then. When we're talking really not that long ago, up to a couple of centuries ago, up to, well, candlelight, all the way up, candlelight or flame as a light source, all the way up just before the turn of the 20th century.
Actually, the central heat done by a wood stove is something that is still seen today. As a matter of fact, I grew up in an old log cabin, and our heating source was a wood stove. And I can tell you honestly, on the Northeast coast, that fire never went out in the winter. Ever.
Right. And I have the kerosene lamp that my mother used to do her homework when she was a kid, and that was in the 1930s. So light and heat from natural sources all the way up into the middle of the 20th century, depending on where you lived. But,
yep.
And those of us who have or have been around small children, have kids, I think we have a better understanding of this than those who don't, in that, if you're around a kid, they are only familiar with the things that have happened within their lifetime. And so they think that's the way it's always been.
Yep.
And so we as modern pagans look at our life and all this stuff that we're doing, and we just kind of assume that, well, this is the way it's always been, right? And it's difficult. The idea of a grocery store, going to a store and buying meat and vegetables and produce and everything else you need to survive throughout the winter, fresh fruit in the summer, fresh fruit all year round. That honestly, the fresh fruit all year round is within my lifetime. That wasn't how it was when I was a kid, and I'm not that old. I don't think. I mean, half a century, give or take. But I mean, yeah, when I was a kid, we didn't have fresh fruit in the winter. It was too expensive to import. So yeah, things changed through time, and because we have always experienced it in a certain way, we kind of assume that that's the way it's always been, right? And unfortunately, that's not the case. And so I think that modern pagans have a hard time associating, empathizing with our ancestors in what it took for them to make it through a hard winter. To us, a hard winter is, okay, the snow fell and it iced up all of the power lines, and now there's no power, but it'll be back on later tonight. That's a hard winter.
Yeah, see, I've had the pleasure of surviving 3 weeks with no electricity, no running water, no way to get down the hill to get to the city. So thank goodness we did have our stockpiles. So, I mean, some of us do kind of understand a little bit. Like, I grew up on a subsistence farm. So we shucked all our own peas. We grew corn. We grew squash. We froze everything and salted everything that we could in order to save it for over the winter time.
And canned the rest.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you made lots of jams and jellies and preserves. Preserves, that whole point of preserves is to preserve the fruit through the winter. And
yes. Now, granted, we had modern appliances to do it. We
Sure.
had the modern canner. We didn't have to do it over an open fire.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody living today can't relate to what happened back then.
Right. But most people, I think, have a hard time.
Yes, I will agree with that.
Those are skills that are, for the most part, lost in modern society.
They are, yeah.
If an EMP were to strike and all of a sudden all of our electronics no longer worked, and we had no way of taking care of things the way we do currently,
probably have about a 90% population die off.
Right, because nobody knows how to farm, nobody knows how to can, nobody knows how to make preserves. All of that.
That a lot of us live in major cities. We don't have the resources to be able to farm or to can or to do any of that.
Right, and so my point being that it's really difficult for a modern pagan to really understand and to really grok, to use a term, to really grok what it was like to be a person in up to the 20th century in trying to survive through the winter. And that's what this holiday of Samhain that we celebrate by dressing up in costumes is really all about. It's about...
Okay, well, the costumes have nothing to do with surviving the winter.
That's correct. But
the costumes were all about scaring away the evil spirits that supposedly crossed through the veil that you didn't want near you. And supposedly the myth goes that somebody that was a good spirit, somebody that you knew, somebody that you wanted to invite into your home, would recognize you through the disguise.
Well, and I know that most of the costumes originally were very ghoulish. They were...
animal heads and skins. That was what the Greeks wrote about.
Really? It goes as far back as the Greeks.
Well, the Greeks wrote about the Celts being around the Samhain fire dressed in animal heads and skins.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So they were making observations. Was it the Greeks or the Romans?
It was the Greeks.
Really?
This was back in the 5th century BC.
Okay, I didn't realize the Greeks had made it that far north and west. Let's
Yes.
see. Yeah. Kat's saying that some of us still have skills, even though no opportunity to use them, and that's true. Absolutely, some people like yourself, have the ability to they have the knowledge, and probably the practical experience if they grew up that way. I know that my mom did a lot of canning, a lot of jams and jellies because she grew up on a farm, so she did a lot of that when I was a kid. I never learned how, but part of my point with the whole idea of the harvest is that that's what this holiday really is about. Is this is the last harvest, and so whatever we've got now, whatever we have harvested, whether it's an abundance or not, this is what we have to live on. At this point in the year, what we're harvesting is the gourds. I don't know if pumpkins are native to Europe or not. I don't think so. I think pumpkins are North American.
Pumpkins are North America.
But
The
there are gourds.
legend of the jack-o'-lantern was potatoes and turnips over in Europe. It wasn't until it came to America that it became pumpkins.
Which makes sense. And so, there are gourds and such that grow in Europe, and so that would be what would be harvested now. And so this is the last, the apples, things like that, things that are ripe now. I suppose in warmer climes down by the Mediterranean, they were harvesting oranges as well, but they didn't travel well. They certainly weren't going to be harvesting oranges in Italy and transporting them north to England. So the people in England were, they would have apples, they'd have other fruits that are ripe at this point, and they would be harvesting those. They harvested all the grain at Mabon, which was last month. So by this point in the year, we have harvested everything we're going to from this summer. We're looking forward to relaxing a little bit, taking some time to rest, because there won't be any, we won't be able to get out of our houses. There won't be much to do. A lot of repair work, a lot of planning for next year, but relatively speaking, they're going to be doing a lot less work because they won't be tending any fields. And so we're looking forward to that, but we're also concerned, depending on what the harvest was like, we may be concerned that will everybody make it through the winter? Will everybody be fed? Even if it's a really good harvest, winter brings along the other things, the diseases, the diseases, the humors, the spirits that cause sickness and death. And so even if we're all well fed, we still may not make it all through the winter because of those other influences that come with winter. We talk about, I think pretty much everybody is familiar with the myth of Persephone and Hades. Hades came and stole Persephone and took her down to his realm, Hades. And when he did that, her mother Demeter was so
grief-stricken.
That's exactly the perfect term. Grief-stricken that she refused to do what she was required to do, what her duties as a goddess were. And so everything died. Everything went dormant. And it actually took Zeus, or Zeus, depending on how you pronounce it, to work out a deal with Hades to bring Persephone back for 6 months out of the year. Now, the thing of it is
I thought it was 9 months.
No, it's well, okay. It depends on
She ate 3 pomegranate seeds.
Well, it depends on the version that you're listening to. Some say it was 3 pomegranate seeds. Some say it was 6. And if you think about it, if you're
where you are in the hemisphere.
Well, if you're in Greece or in Italy, it's going to be warmer a lot longer. So it is going to be more along the lines of 9 months of warm weather and 3 months of really cold weather. So that does make sense. I think that as people move farther north And as the Roman Empire progressed and those stories were continually retold and retold, they were modified for the area that they were in, so that it made much more sense. So by the time you get to Roman Britain, it is going to be closer to 6 months of cold and 6 months of warm, and so that myth changes. But the other thing is, even after that, the thing about it is that most people assume that Persephone was kidnapped. Well, she was kidnapped in the fact that Hades came and took her from her mother, but she went willingly. She was in love with Hades. Hades was a very powerful god. He was one of the three original gods to come from Gaia and Kronos. He was one of the three brothers. It was Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. They were the three brothers who were the originators of the Olympian gods. So he was a very powerful being, and he had dominion over a realm that was bigger than any of the other gods combined. And so he had a lot of power, he had a lot of sway. And by all accounts, he tended to be because he's a god, he's a very handsome man. So there's nothing untoward about a goddess, a beautiful young goddess falling in love with Hades. It wasn't.
Yeah, I'm going to argue with you there. Not every god was beautiful. Hephaestus, the Vulcan god, was known for being extremely ugly.
That's correct. And who was his wife?
Venus. What's
Aphrodite.
her name? Aphrodite.
Correct. But the point I'm trying to make here is that it wasn't until the Christianity started to take over that these myths were changed, so that the old gods were
became Christianized.
They became much more evil, much more and especially Hades, who was, to the Christians, he was the god of hell, not the god of the underworld. So therefore, he was the Roman or Greek equivalent of Satan, of Lucifer, of the devil. And so no one would willingly want to marry this being, so they changed the myth. But if you look at the old myths, what it talks about is how Ares and Hermes and I think Adonis, a bunch of these really well-to-do, very handsome gods had all tried to court Persephone and were all turned away by her mother. It was her mother, her very overprotective mother, who kept her, decided that no god was good enough for her daughter, and therefore made sure that none of them ever got anywhere with her daughter. And so it
pretty high standards to say that none of the gods were even good enough for her daughter.
But it was her mother that really created this situation in the first place by not allowing Persephone to date. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. No, he's not good enough for you. You need to find someone better. Well, I don't know how you're going to find better than a god, but okay. So, yeah.
And, one of the things that I came across for Samhain, getting back on topic here, is some of the forgotten rituals and rites from different places around the world had a lot to do with finding a future husband or finding a future potential mate.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the things you strive for at this time of year is who's going to be my husband or who's going to be my wife? Absolutely.
Yep. In 18th century Ireland, a matchmaking cook might bury a ring in her mashed potatoes on Samhain and hope to bring true love to the diner who found it. In Scotland, fortune tellers recommended that eligible young women name a hazelnut for each of her suitors and then toss the nuts into the fireplace. The nut that burned to ashes rather than popping or exploding, the story went, represented the girl's future husband. In some versions, though, the opposite was true. The nut that burned away symbolized the love that would not last.
Okay. Or the love that would be
Another
missed.
tale, yeah. Another tale had it that a young woman ate a sugary concoction made out of walnuts, hazelnuts, and nutmeg before bed on Samhain, and she would dream about her future husband.
Yeah.
Let's see, there's another one that says that women would toss apple peels over their shoulders, hoping that the peels would fall on the floor in the shape of their future husband's initials.
Well, that seems like a stretch.
Yeah, there's tons of different things that they used to do to divine their future mate.
Well, that kind of looks like an N, and that might be a Z.
Yeah,
I can see, not to make fun of women, but I can see a bunch of women standing around a pile of apple skins trying to figure out, well, what initials might those be?
well, remember, these were a very superstitious people
Oh,
that,
absolutely.
yeah, they lived completely off of the land and they lived completely off of the supernatural forces that are around them. So, as a result, these divining natures were extremely important to them.
Well, and Samhain is known for it's known because the veil between this world and the next is so thin. It is known as a time to scry, a time to look to tell the future, to look towards the future, to try and find what's going to happen. And so, yes, Samhain is that time of the year where people tend to look and see what's going to happen to me in the next year. How will the next year go? Will I find love? And if so, who with?
And actually, this is a very important time for that because during the winter time, you're not out in the fields. So you've got more time to do courting. And then Beltane comes around, and then all of a sudden, everybody's getting married.
Or at least, yes, you've been cooped up at least within your village for the past several months because you couldn't go very far in the cold and the snow, and so and it's cold, so you're looking for warmth, and so you probably have found someone to spend some quality time with. So Beltane gives you that excuse to actually go out and consummate this relationship that you've been forming over the winter, and because you may how do I say this? You might make this an actual relationship that people are aware of at Beltane. Then you've got a year of being a couple, of getting to know each other, and then at the following Beltane, you announce your engagement, your betrothal, and at that point, you've also got all of these weddings because after the announcement, you're going to get married fairly quickly. You've already had a year, so now you have a wedding in June, which is why June is the traditional month of weddings. These are all related. All of these holidays are related to each other in different ways through custom, through myth, through the season. What happens and how we have as a species, how we have put significance onto them. So yeah, Samhain, you're absolutely going to be looking at the next year. What's going to happen to me? How am I going to prosper, or hopefully prosper, in the next year?
Yeah, and Samhain is a time for new beginnings. It's a time for opening the door to the new year. It's a time for starting over. It's a time for cleaning out the closets and getting ready for what's coming.
Well, and the Celts, this was their new year. This is the beginning of their year, which makes a whole lot of sense when you understand that the Celts started their day at dusk. So their day began as the sun set and went all the way through until the next sunset. So it makes perfect sense that their year would be starting and ending as the warm time of the year ends and the cold time starts, that dusk of the year.
Now, it's worth noting that it is rather well known that the Celtic New Year begins on Samhain. But it also should be known that was only suggested in the late 19th century by Sir John Rhys and Sir James Fraser. That's not something we know from history.
Okay.
That's something that was suggested in the late 19th century.
And that's one of the caveats, to use a little bit of Latin, is that we know very little about the Celts themselves because, while they had writing, they
were Christianized.
Well, they didn't tend to write down day-to-day stuff. Their writing was much like the Norse, was for special occasions, so they didn't write everything down. And so most of what we know about the Celts comes to us either from the Romans, who were conquerors, or from the Christians, who were religious conquerors. And so a lot of what they did was looked at as either backward, wrong, or just completely inappropriate. And so
keep in mind, when you're reading history is written by the winners.
Yes, history is written by the victors, absolutely. And it is human nature to demonize the enemy.
Correct.
Anybody who has watched a film about World War II understands the demonization that happens, and usually in the film it's very the demonization is very light. They'll use terms like like Nip or Jerry, but but again, this is dehumanizing the enemy. It's much easier to kill an enemy when they're not human; they're something other, and we've done that throughout history. And so yes, all of that, almost everything we know about the Celts came to us from their conquerors. On the plus side, we do have some knowledge about this Samhain holiday because other cultures celebrated it as well. Like we were saying,
that is correct.
The Romans and the Greeks celebrated the last harvest. I suspect pretty much every culture around the globe celebrates that last harvest in some form or fashion.
Even the Native Americans did.
Correct.
I mean, it's not the traditional Thanksgiving that we think of when we think of pilgrims and all of that. There's a lot of people who refute that ever even happened. However, when the Native Americans did their harvest, they did have a festival at the end of it, and they would celebrate the fact that the harvest was in.
Well, and that was the next thing, is that this Samhain is actually what we would consider Thanksgiving. We Americans, not everybody, but we Americans celebrate Thanksgiving way wrong, because it became a political holiday. We should be celebrating Thanksgiving this time of year in October, because Thanksgiving, if you, as you mentioned, the whole pilgrim thing, it was about the harvest. The pilgrims didn't have the food; they weren't able to harvest their crops, and so the Native Americans came in and shared with them what they had. At least that's the way the story goes. Don't know that actually happened, but even so, if you're not harvesting at the end of November, you're harvesting it around October. So we should, if we were going to do it properly, we should be celebrating Thanksgiving now or around Samhain, not next month. It's far too late. But when politics get involved, you've got to compromise, and all of a sudden it becomes, I'm almost surprised that Thanksgiving is in the middle of March. I really am not.
I called into a radio show at one point, and the question on the radio show was, how do you know it's Christmas? And so I called in and I said, when Walmart puts out the Valentine's Day decorations.
Right. Yeah, it must be Christmas when and in fact, I was watching the news. They were talking about the fact that stores are putting out Christmas decorations already, and it's not even Samhain yet. We still got a couple of weeks.
King Supers was putting out pumpkins in July.
Yeah, And that unfortunately is how a lot of people get their ideas of what the season is and what the holiday is about. Is I saw it in the store, therefore it must be time. And instead of doing it by the way our ancestors did, which was by looking at the world around them, you know, we think of Halloween or Samhain as being the time when everything's gone into dormance, but really, and depending on where you live, here things are just starting to go into dormance. We still have the aspen trees in the mountains. Depending on the southern side of the state, they're still going nice and gold. They haven't fallen from the trees yet. Most a lot of the aspen trees are still in that fall foliage, and certainly the trees around my house are starting to get that color. They're becoming that colorful array that we associate with fall. They won't drop their leaves until after Samhain. After Samhain, now the trees are bare and it looks like winter. By looking around, by looking at the world around you, by observing what is happening in the world around you, you get a much better idea of what season we're really in, other than looking at a calendar or checking out the local store.
Speaking of taking a look at the world around you, one of the things I'm going to encourage is, celebrate Samhain. Make it into a thing in your house. Even if you aren't owner of a garden, it's still something you should be celebrating. Okay, take a nature walk. Take a look at all of the colors and the sounds and the sensations that are around you, and bring that into your circle of life. Reflect on death and rebirth and make that an important part of you. Another thing that you can do is build a Samhain altar in your house. You can decorate it with symbols of late fall, like harvest foods like pumpkins and squash and root vegetables, nuts, dried berries, dark breads like rye and pumpernickels, dried leaves, acorns, cornucopias, mulled cider, wine, and mead. You can honor your deceased family members on the altar. You can put photographs, heirlooms, mementos, even pets. It's a wonderful way to celebrate this time of the year.
And that brings us around to the concept of the dumb supper. A lot of people have heard about it. I don't know that a lot of people understand it. And I have to apologize. We were having some problems with your audio. I'm not sure what that is, but you were having some weird cutouts there. So I'm not sure
if it. Water heater came on.
Well, no, your sound is actually kind of cutting out strangely. The dumb supper is one of those things that we talk about, and I don't know that a whole lot of people understand what it is. And what it is, at Samhain, you put a place at the table for an ancestor or the ancestors who have passed beyond and now are on the other side of the veil, and you serve them dinner just as if they were there. And yeah, Kat says she's attended several dumb suppers. You serve you set a place, you serve dinner just as if they were there, and it is an acknowledgement that they may be gone from this plane of existence, but they still exist. They are still with us. And it is a way to remind ourselves that these people are still alive as long as we remember them. And
that's right. That's just like in Mexico, they have this celebration of the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
And they bring food and wine and offerings to their dead ancestors, and they believe that as long as they do this, as long as they remember them, then they will reside in a very happy place where it's constant happiness versus the realm of the forgotten.
Right, right. Because the worst thing, and that fear goes back all the way to the Egyptians. The worst thing that can happen to somebody who's passed is to be forgotten. And the Egyptians solved that by literally preserving the body for the rest of time, as far as they were concerned, and certainly for up to 5,000 years at this point. And it was by preserving that body and keeping it whole, they felt that the spirit of the deceased person, the person who had passed, would have that body to use in the next life, and therefore would be able to exist and be happy for all of eternity. And that particular idea that existing, of still being around, of continuing after death, is what drives pretty much every religion, especially Christianity. They're very big on that whole life after death thing. And are you going to be rewarded in heaven, or are you going to be punished in hell? So pretty much every religion has that whole idea of some sort of life after death. We tend to look at a life after death as not just a place that we go, but also most of us are reincarnationists, and so we believe we come back to learn more lessons, to live other lives, to learn more, to become better us. And that is something that there's no punishment, there's no if you're really good, you'll come back as a wonderful being. If you're really bad, you'll come back as a snail. There's nothing like that. It's simply you come back to learn a lesson and to complete the lessons that you haven't learned. And once you have learned all of those lessons, once you have become the best you that you can be, there's no longer any reason for you to come back. And so you continue on to another existence, whether that becomes a godlike being or something else. That depends on the path that you tend to follow.
And that's highly dependent on what you personally believe.
Correct. Absolutely. These are all very personal beliefs. Well, I'm looking at the clock. We are a couple minutes past the hour. This has been a very fast hour. I don't know if
yes, it has. I'm
surprised at how fast it went. Chat was kind of silent. We had a few comments there, here and there, but I'm glad everybody showed up. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Hopefully you learned something.
Yeah, I have. Since the beginning, I have had the idea of having a co-host, and Rebecca's been around watching for the past 9 months. And so, I started talking to her. It's like, well, you want a co-host? She said, okay. We're going to try and work out a schedule where we might be able to do this more than once a month. I don't know how often, but we're going to try and see if we can't do something a little more than once a month to one, build up an audience, but also to kind of, get some information out there for people. Okay. Cats want to know why it's called a dumb supper. And the reason it's called a dumb supper, dumb is one of those politically incorrect terms. Back in the day, a person who was deaf and mute was called dumb, and it was because they couldn't speak and they couldn't hear. People assumed that they were not intelligent, and what we've done is we've taken that whole idea of the spirit not being able to speak.
Well, dumb is also another word for silence or absence.
Correct. It's a person who can't speak obviously isn't intelligent enough to speak is where it started, but it means silent. It means someone who doesn't speak, and so the spirit isn't expected to speak. And no one else at the table speaks either. It's a completely silent dinner, and therefore it's a dumb supper. So hopefully that answers your question. for those of you who are in the local area around Denver, uh, we do have a happening. Let me fix up some of this stuff here. We do have a happening here that happens every year, and that is the Denver Witches Ball.
And it's
And
fantastically fun.
it says 25th annual. I think it's actually been going on longer than that. But this year it's going to be on the 29th, I believe.
Mhm.
And tickets are on sale at denverwitchesball.com.
And they have drumming, and they have a huge Samhain ritual, and they
Costume
have a great
contest.
vendors area. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, costume contest, as you can see. And they have live music. They have I missed the drumming last year, but I was also not feeling all that well last year, so I may have I may have missed it, but it is a good time, and it's certainly worth going to. Get your tickets online at denverwitchesball.com. They're a little cheaper, and you just walk up, give them a name, and you walk in the door. And it is probably, well, I would go so far to say it is the largest single evening event in the year. You will find people there that you may not see other places, with the possible exception of Dragonfest. Dragonfest is probably bigger, but it's also a camping trip, and it's over several days. This is the biggest single evening event in the year that we do, and it really can be a blast. And it gives us a chance to dress up. I've got a new costume I'm going to try. We'll see how it goes. Oh, that's an interesting concept. There we go. I'm gonna go as the pagan pope, and we'll see how that works out. People have been accusing me of trying to take over the community for years, so I'm gonna take that and run with it. Rebecca, it's been wonderful. I'm glad to have you as a co-host. This has been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun for me too, and I really enjoyed it.
And we'll be.
Especially since it's my birthday.
You what?
Because especially since it's my birthday.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, yeah. I'm just not gonna say a word. Um, but so yeah. It's been wonderful, and I'm glad to have you. And we'll see you next month, if not before. Like I said, we're going to try and work out a schedule where we can do this more than once a month, so that we can get people more information. Maybe do a little bit of information, more information, and more education, and we'll see how it goes from there. So we will see you later.
Absolutely.